see. So it's a blessing and a curse because we're glad that they're providing habitat, but their job is increasingly difficult to make a living, on diminishing quality and quantity of acres, and often that's to the exclusion or detriment of wildlife. If you think about what our farms used to be, they used to be forests and prairies and wetlands. And so, there are still some of that, but we've lost a lot of those ecosystems. I'm gonna give you this lecture on managing agricultural habitat, and another one on managing forest habitat, and another one on managing wetland habitat. And that trifecta, is just how I break it down. But there's other habitats that we can talk about. But those are three big ones, and so I'm gonna go into depth with each one. Think about our farms today, and when we contrast that to what a farm looked like in 1880 or 1900 or 1920 or even 1950 to a degree, they were very different. And average farm size was maybe 15 to 50 acres. This was pre-tractors. They were two mules and a plow, right? Each row crop field, might be 3 to 5 acres. A 20-acre field was a big field. It was a great big field. The hedgerows in between the fields were very wide, and those hedgerows, provided tremendous travel corridors and habitat. Since your average farm was 2 mules and a plow, and we didn't have artificial fertilizers back then, a farmer didn't have the resources usually to plow up all his land, and wouldn't want to anyway, because if you farmed every field every year, they would soon become useless and fertile. So any given year, on average, about 80%, 85% of the fields would be left fallow. The crops were all weedy. There was no herbicides, so it was all, just full of ragweed and a million other native forbs. And we didn't have these extensive monocultures of corn and wheat and beans like we have today. We didn't have these federal crop insurance programs. Any given year, 1 or 2 crops are going to do badly. So most farmers grew several different types of crops. So you had a lot of diversity of crops and vegetation on the land. Okay? That was optimal for some species of wildlife. That was phenomenal northern bobwhite habitat. A lot of people say, why don't we have bobwhite like we had in the 1950s? Well, 1950s was artificially high populations because we were inadvertently managing perfectly for them, right? We've gone the other direction, and we're trying to find middle ground now, and we're slowly getting better. But think about our farms today: hundreds of acres, maybe thousands of acres. Your average field is much larger than 15 to 50 acres. It's hundreds of acres, and sometimes more than that. Hardly any hedgerows. We have herbicides. We try, and tractors. We try to avoid hedgerows at all. Nothing fallow. Hardly ever is anything fallow. We use herbicides. We use Roundup Ready corn and beans. So there's very few other species besides what they're growing. They're growing mostly one thing, they're growing one thing in a huge field every year. So there's just little diversity. Sucks for wildlife, right? There's not much to it. So we're kind of begging for scraps. We're begging for corners. Are you willing to grow a hedgerow along your road or along this creek ditch, or how can we work with you to grow some sort of habitat? So, and I've just said all this stuff. Oh yeah, we've drained a lot of our wetlands. We've removed 80% of our bottomland hardwood forest. Pesticides, herbicides, inorganic fertilizers run off, get into our groundwater. Guys, if the only thing that you do for wildlife in your entire career is manage to get livestock fenced out of the creeks of Tennessee, you will have done more for wildlife than 10 biologists put together over the course of their whole careers. Just livestock and creeks is tremendously detrimental, and it's real hard to create policies to get them out of there. And we have, a growing number of people. How many of you guys, have dads or grandpas or relatives or know old retired guys who have a 20-acre yard and just love to just mow it all summer long, right? Recreational mowing, and that's just so much potential. If they could just stop mowing around the end of August and let that grow up so that you've got some vegetative cover for small wildlife over the course of the winter, that would be 100 times better than keeping it mowed all the way down all the way around. So there's a lot of things that they can do that improve wildlife habitat that also can improve usually long-term profitability of the farm. Might suffer short-term, but diversifying crops buffers against failure of any one crop. Has anybody heard that this idea that as the Central Valley of California, right here. This is where a lot of our vegetables, our produce is grown in the United States, right? A little bit down here in Florida, but a whole lot right there. As this gets less and less water available to it, and climate impacts are increasing, the country, the agricultural systems in our country are looking for other places to grow our produce, and they're kind of looking more and more at this part of the world. So it could be that we'll see more and more produce farms in West Tennessee and surrounding areas, and that could benefit wildlife. If you mix up our corn and beans with some produce farms in between, maybe more edges and more diversity. So crop diversification is good, and that can be good for farming as well. Edge enhancement is good. What do I mean by edge?
The area between two different habitats.
Yeah. So where you value picture Piper.
Perfect.
Yeah, excellent.
That's
Good,
what I
good.
wanted.
Okay, good. So there's a forest, right? And there's a field, and that's the edge, right? And if this field is a row crop field, and right here is a pasture, that place where those three ecosystems come together is a very valuable place. How many of you hunt edges? Anybody? Yeah, me too, right? So edges are valuable, and you can actually have more edge if that's a 100-acre field, and that's a 100-acre field. Just geometrically, there is more edge here than there is here, as strange as that sounds. So by making long, narrow fields, you get more edge, and there's a lot of wildlife species that aren't comfortable getting far away from the edge, so they won't use the middle of that field. But here, they can use that field and not be too far from the edge and use a lot more of it. So having long, skinny fields instead of great, big, square or round fields can be more efficient for a lot of wildlife species. Rotating crops with fallow fielding allows for soil regeneration. A lot of farmers can't always afford to do that, but if they can, it's good for their soil, and it means the next year, usually their crops are going to be a lot better especially if they plant cover crops in the meantime. A lot of managing farmland habitat, some of the best things we can do is managing the hedgerows, the areas in between the fields, in between the field and the stream. Vegetation along fence rows and streams can help combat erosion. There's plenty of farmers that say, oh yeah, I leave strips, between my fields or along the stream, a bush hog width, 15 feet or 30 feet, and that's okay. But 45 feet, 60 feet plus is a whole lot better. And asking farmers to give that up is hard to do because every acre they give up is dollars lost, and it's hard to make a living farming. But imagine this. Imagine that the width of this room right here extends on for half a mile, quarter mile. This is a field edge that a farmer, how wide is this? Would you say this is about 20 feet, 22 feet, something like that wide? So this is their edge that they leave unmowed every winter, okay? And you guys are rabbits, and I'm a coyote, okay? And if I walk down the middle of this field, and it's this wide, it's a whole lot more likely that I'm gonna find every one of you than if it's 60 feet wide, right? So it's just simple, the pragmatic idea. The wider the hedgerow, the better. The narrower it gets, the more likely it becomes a trap, or I could say the more of a trap, a predator trap it becomes. All the prey are trying to hide in it because it's the only thing there. And so it's just a smorgasbord for the predators because they're likely going to be found, right? So predation goes up, survival of the prey species goes down. So we have to be real careful. If we've got a whole bunch of crappy habitat and we create just a little bit of real good habitat, we could actually have a detrimental impact on our remaining wildlife. We have to have enough so that they can escape predation. A lot of the time, when we're restoring habitats and restoring hedgerows, we just let stuff grow. And there's all sorts of stuff that great trees and shrubs that are going to grow on their own. But sometimes we'll plant some species that are really good at producing soft mast and escape cover. 3 common ones that we often plant around here, there are others, there's several species of native plum, okay, American plum, Chickasaw plum, several other plums. There are a bunch of species of native crabapple, and there are a bunch of species of native hawthorn. And you can get those from the Tennessee Division of Forestry and from lots of other places. And those are great. You just plant and some of you in the Wildlife Society might have done some of these plantings for CRP contracts. I'm not sure when you did tree plantings, maybe. Yeah, crabapple. So if in your management plan, you're planting trees for hedgerows, plum, crabapple, and hawthorn are really good ones. Sometimes, I'll see people say, well, we're gonna buy elderberry and we're gonna buy blackberry to plant. And my response to that is, or sumac, we're gonna buy sumac to plant. And my response to that is, don't waste your money. It's gonna grow. It's gonna come on its own. It's everywhere out there in the seed money. It's gonna come. We've kind of lost these a lot. So buying them and planting them back is great. Silky dogwood, sassafras, Carolina buckthorn, redbud, sweet gum, these are all species that are out there in the seed bank and they'll come back, and that diversity of trees is really good and valuable for wildlife. A lot of time farmers don't like, landowners don't like the idea of hedgerows because they get crop stunting, those few feet, those few rows of crops at the edge of the field just don't grow as high, and it's a very common thing. A lot of the time, landowners think it's because they're getting shaded out, and that could be the issue. Consider this though: if this room is a 50-acre field, why would I expect to see more of a shading problem at this edge than at that edge?
You look at where the sun's coming from.
Again, same as aspect. Sun is south, right? It's coming down, and these trees at the edge of this field are going to block the sun coming down from the south. So there's going to be more shade at this edge, but that sun is not going to be blocked by those trees at the north edge. Does that make sense? So whether it's north or south could have an influence. But what we usually see more of an impact from the tree's roots getting nutrients and water. Their roots are coming out here. Usually the roots come out as far as the drip line, the outside edge of the canopy. So what we can do to try to minimize that is running a root plow, 2 or 3 passes, each time a little bit deeper until you get a root plow up to about 2 feet deep along the edge of the field once every few years, every 3 or 4 years. That cuts those outer roots and minimizes the amount of water and nutrient uptake that they're stealing from the crops. Check with the utility company, be sure that you're not going to cut any cables or pipes, but otherwise that can be kind of a compromise practice that a landowner, give it a try, see if you get better response from your corn and beans, and if you do, maybe you're going to be willing to live with that hedgerow that we think is really valuable for you. So these are the types of tools we can use. Like I said, we've drained 50% of our wetlands in North America. We've got rid of 80% of our bottomland hardwood forests in Tennessee. Wetland drainage is something that we don't see as much of, but we do still see, maintaining areas where wetlands were drained in the past and trying to keep them drained. So one of the ways that people often do it is by putting in tile, okay? And this is where you kind of dig a ditch, and then you take a perforated pipe and you put it in the bottom of the ditch, and you can cover it with gravel or loose soil. And so this is the low point of the field. When water runs off, goes into that ditch, it goes into the perforations of the pipe, which carries it off to the creek or river very quickly and keeps that field drained. It keeps it dry. It keeps it from returning to a wetland. So if we ever are trying to restore a wetland in a field that was modified from a wetland in the past that's been tiled, we got to break up that tile so that water will stop draining off there. Okay. And what can we do to encourage that? A farmer needs every acre to try to make a living. We have conservation programs within the Farm Bill, specifically the Wetland Reserve Program. Who remembers what that is? Who does not remember what that is? Who remembers hearing about it, but you're not sure exactly what it is? Yeah, okay. All right. So the big one is the Conservation Reserve Program, which pays landowners to retire erodible soil for 10 years, okay? What the Wetland Reserve Program does is if you've got a row crop field that used to be a wetland, the basic Wetland Reserve Program pays the farmer to no longer row crop it and restore the wetland conditions, break up the tile. It might involve planting stuff, but no longer row cropping it. And the fundamental Wetland Reserve Program is not a 10-year program. It's in perpetuity. It's forever. So the farmer is selling the easement to farm, to row crop it to the U.S. government. And so that can be great. You get a wetland back. But historically, over the past several decades, farmers haven't really been too groovy on that because they're like, well, why would I give up my farm? What you get fundamentally is the assessed value of the land. So if a farmer's got hundreds of acres of prime agricultural land that's worth $500,000, they get a check for $500,000. They put that in the bank and live off the interest. Or you never row crop it again, but you got great wetland habitat. You put in 3 duck blinds and make $10,000 a year off of each one, right? So there are incentives that we can use. Farmers, even that were reticent to go into Wetland Reserve Program in the past, are slowly becoming more open to the idea because they're getting sick of getting flooded out and having to go through the whole federal crop insurance program every third year. Okay, so that's a tool that we have to encourage landowners to get some sort of economic benefit by restoring that most critical habitat that we've lost on our farms.